Thank you, Dr. Kellogg. Do you want to stay up there? You want to come back here? However you want to do this, fine.
I'll come over
You want to
there.
come back? Before we go into some brief discussion here, I would like, on behalf of the board, to absolutely thank Mr. LaRose for all the work that he's done for a long time, but particularly in this section today. Would love to thank Liz Washburn and Jack Brown, who are still here, right? There you are. Thank you for the tremendous amount of work that you all have done and being willing to be here tonight. Mrs. Davidson and I attended, I think, each one of the meetings as kind of the board representatives. Really, just so grateful for all those folks that Richard joined at one of the meetings as well. I don't know if any others, I don't want to leave anybody out, but the folks that were on that slide, they not only outside of their normal work life were participating in this process, they actually toured some of the buildings too. And just beyond grateful for all that you've done. And I would say, and then I'm just going to ask for board comments, and I'll chime in as well. We are just really honored by the community that is allowing us to have this kind of discussion and has supported this district, certainly financially, but in many other ways. The tremendous amount of volunteer work that goes on in this district is, I would suggest, incalculable. So thank you to the community for allowing us to do this kind of deep dive and hard discussion. And some of the community will be involved in some of that deep dive and hard discussion. No decisions have been made. And we are excited to begin the process of looking at this information. I don't know if we want to go in order down this way. Jerry, do you want to dive in first? Or however you all want to do this.
Okay. I have a question, and I think it's going to be for Jeff. How much money would it take to begin the very beginning stages of the design process for the priority 1 items that they talked about, a new middle school and renovation at South High School?
So I've had some discussions with Triad Architects in reference to that, and going back to the model for the Ohio School Facilities Commission in designing projects of this magnitude, they budget 7.5% for design, clear up to the construction documents. Plus, there's another 6+% for construction management. A total, I think they have 16+% for all non-construction costs. Now, for the component you're talking about, our goal is to come in under that OSFC model of 7.5% for design. So when we're looking at those critical 1 issues, which would be South and the new middle school, and if we're just doing the schematic design, so and again working with Triad, they have about 20% of the total design fees for schematic design. When I've done that preliminary calculation, it's coming in around $750,000.
Okay. And how long does the process take to do projects like this, from the design to the bidding and the construction? I know it might be different for a new school versus a renovation. Do you have any ideas? And I know you can't promise anything, but
Well, the challenge is going to be, number one, identifying what the scope of work is, and the one challenge being South with an occupied building. So a new middle school is a little more clean cut because we're not working around an existing facility that's occupied. So South is a bit of a challenge. We had preliminarily laid out a plan based on this was a no new tax option that was presented to us when the Treasurer's Office presented, and we had a consultant come in. And it was based on financing through the capital plan. Typically, those dollars have to be expended over a 3-year time frame. Now, what they shared is if the scope of work is one that is supported by your architect, you can go up to 5 years. So with the scope of work that was identified, the 3 tiers, we had worked to, can we do this volume of work in a 5-year period? And the answer was yes. So specifically for South High School, and again, this was based on working around the existing occupants, the students. We had that over a 4-year time frame. Now, that's not to say we could look at that more aggressively if we're tasked to do so. There could be opportunities where if we build a new addition, which is part of the $34 million option, and we build that is conducted during the school year, and we would have to be mindful that we're doing that work outside of when we're having classes with noise and such. We could look at a build and then relocate a portion of the students so we had opportunities to renovate during the school year. And when I say during the school year, most of that work is going to be evenings and weekends. So I shared a 4-year option that we could look at consolidating that.
Okay. I mean, what would be a really good case scenario timeframe then? Is it 3 years, 2?
Well, with the middle school as an example, where we don't have those same obstacles. So we have budgeted in there a year for design. We have 2 months in for bidding an award, and we have 17 months in there for construction. So it's roughly a 2.5-year project for the new middle school. Again, that's preliminary estimating. If there's a desire of the school board, we can look at that harder, but that gives you a general idea.
Okay.
Did that answer your question, or?
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you, Jeff.
sure.
Those are my questions, and then I'll come back.
Might as well just stay there, Jeff. I
Okay.
have a few questions
Sure.
for you. Let's see where to start. When costs were identified as regards renovation, how do you define those costs to renovate?
So one of the slides I had shared, you had looked at the building components, the existing infrastructure components. So the renovation costs are based on condition assessment only. So, for example, South High School identified between 13 and 14 million. That was just looking at what the engineers and architects had identified as things that should be done now or forecasted over a 10-year period. And this is the same model that's used by the OSFC. When you look at that $34 million option, that was looking at also incorporating 21st century design into the mix, which isn't part of the condition assessment. Again, the condition assessment is just the physical infrastructure as you see it today. 21st century design is creating those project-based learning environments. So at South High School, for example, where you have those long hallways with the classrooms flanked on each side, we were looking at ways we could open up these wings. When we were opening up wings, it required us looking at putting additional space onto the building. So and that 34 million, we had identified 7 different areas for possible expansion using the existing footprint and not encroaching to where we're having to modify parking areas or having to modify fields, ball fields. So that 34 million included all 7 additions that we identified. So it could very well be that all 7 are not needed, and that cost could come down. But for the committee's work, we had shared all the possibilities to expand the building and incorporate 21st century design.
So you're looking at basically $14 million for safe, warm, and dry, and then $20 million beyond that.
That is correct.
Another question on definition. When you're talking about Emerson and Hanby, and you say that inefficiencies cannot be resolved, what are those inefficiencies?
Inefficiencies that were discussed and identified as part of the firsthand building tours, and this was also hearing feedback from staff. And as an example, Hanby with those sizes of classrooms, we heard from administration there that it's very challenging to do the type of learning that they desire with the limitations of the size of the classrooms being under 700 square feet. Again, OSFC model recommends 900. Now, you don't have that issue at Emerson. The size of those classrooms are at or beyond what OSFC recommends. The challenge is there. It is a small building that has limited space in the cafe. It does not have a gymnasium. When we were looking at how we could add to Emerson to incorporate that, there's just no room. You have no green space. You're looking at all the paved areas is the playground. You have limited parking there. You have limited parking at Hanby. So both of those sites are relatively 1 acre. And the challenges were how can we grow those buildings to accommodate 21st century design when you're limited to 1 acre. Central College was a discussion point as well, but with the additional acre we picked up more recently, you've got a total of 5. And with some preliminary work done with Triad Architects, we had shown where we could expand the size of that building via a replacement and incorporate 21st century design.
Another question, kind of definitional also.
Sure.
But not quite as definitional. When you talk about overcapacity at the different grade levels, it would be helpful to get a sense of where those overcapacity numbers are as regards the particular buildings we're talking about. And in other words, where are the overcapacities projected to be in the attendance areas as they're currently designed?
We have that information. We can certainly come back and share that. When we were discussing that at today's presentation, it was a mix for capacity at middle school as a total. So we have forecasted there's a given year. Actually, it's FY20. This is FY21, based on current capacity as identified in FY17. And again, you've heard me say this before.
Right.
What we do is reach out to principals to tell us how they're using each space, and then we in turn take that information and recalculate the given capacity. So we had the capacities for last year, and we were looking at that, measuring that against the updated forecasted enrollment. And for middle school, the capacity, the enrollment was exceeding the capacity in FY21 at middle school, and at high school it was FY25. We didn't have that issue at elementary, with the exception if we're going to grow programming. So if we're going to add the spaces that were identified by the curriculum department for all-day kindergarten and limited English proficient, that was warranting the new elementary school.
So as you look at the high schools,
Yes.
and you look at the attendance areas or the attendance patterns for each of the high schools and our current districting of who attends which schools and so forth, what, of the number of students that we anticipate moving into the high schools with the continuing population growth that we have, what are you looking at as regards overcapacity numbers specifically for South and specifically for North? I've got a pretty good sense of where Central is right now, but what are we looking at particularly at South and North?
Yeah, great question. And if you recall, when we did the enrollment forecasting, we didn't pay for that level of detail. So that was a much more expensive option for us to look at. What we paid for was looking at it as a breakdown of elementary, middle, and high school.
So that's something down the road we would have to look at.
We could look at trend data. We do have trend data, but but in terms of forecasting, we could certainly present that option for the board's consideration in terms of procuring our consultant to perform that, but we haven't done that to date.
If I might, to that point, I'm working with a firm now, Jeff knows about this, with a forecasting tool I use that will use cohort survival methodology. And so what we're doing is building into a GPS system neighborhood maps. So if you think of neighborhoods attached to schools, we'll be able to, using neighborhood maps and their cohort survival method, we'll actually be able to break this down to neighborhoods. And so as we look at boundary areas, we'll be able to say, okay, the enrollment projections based on this model. Now, of course, the smaller the size, the smaller the n size, it's typical statistics. There's more variability, but we'll have the capacity to do enrollment projections by neighborhood. And when we look at boundaries, we can see some of that, so for South, et cetera.
That's great. That's great. One more quick one, and then 2 quick comments, and I'm done.
Okay.
Let me see, which ones do I want to pick? Am I understanding correctly? As I look at the recommendations for the elementary schools, what I am seeing over time is that we are going to be, if we were to follow the recommendations as presented, and we've got lots of community input yet to come, but, just working from what I have right now, basically, we would be getting rid of almost all of our small elementaries. We would be expanding sizes so that basically Amherst and Longfellow would be the smallest. So most of our buildings would be larger elementaries, 600 students and up.
Well, keep in mind the recommendation for Longfellow was to expand Longfellow.
I know,
Okay.
like 450.
Yep.
Yeah, that's why I said Longfellow. So
Okay.
the smallest buildings basically would be the Longfellow, and Amherst would be our smallest buildings until we build onto Amherst, which would take that up to 600. So we'd
That sounds-
basically
that
be
sounds correct, yes.
removing, all of our buildings would tend to be in that 600 student size at the elementaries, with the exception of a Longfellow. Am I understanding that correctly?
I'd have to go back and check. It definitely within the 450 and 600 recommended range, based on the feedback we had from elementary education. But I'd
Okay.
have to check and see if
I did
there's.
some, I did some preliminary in that, so the other part of the recommendation was the new middle school, the new elementary at Minerva Park, which shifts enrollment. So I don't think you get lots of buildings at 600. I think the bulk of our buildings fall around 500
Okay, that's
because of the
very helpful.
redistribution of population
Thank
from
you.
portions.
That's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Yeah, that's
Then-
correct. The Minerva Park Elementary was, the price we had shared was based on a 500 student
Right.
capacity.
Okay, that's good. Then just 2 general things. Number 1, the community engagement piece. That, in my estimation, is extraordinarily important. When we're talking about what needs to be done, we're talking major sums of money and significant changes in a lot of our buildings. That means that because the schools belong to everybody within the community, we really need to get thoughts and feelings from community members broadly, widely across, whether they work within the district, whether they attend the schools, whether they do not. So I really want us to lead with that as quickly as we possibly can. We all have opinions about the recommendations, thoughts, feelings, knowledge about the recommendations, but it's extremely important that we take the recommendations as they are to the community and move those into discussion so that there can be no doubt that we haven't made up our minds about anything. The recommendations are really good. There are some that, I raise my hand and say, well, what if and what about? But we haven't made up our mind. And I'm hearing some people saying, well, you're going to do this and you're going to do that. No, we haven't said that. So it's important that we go out. We need to do it. One thing that I want to be sure that we draw attention to, and Dr. Kellogg, you put it in your slide on next steps, there needs to be substantial thought regarding Emerson and Hanby. Substantial. We cannot incorporate it in the other recommendations, as important as they all are as well, because of Emerson and Hanby's historic place within the district. So thank you for calling that out. I appreciate it. The last thing is, The reason I didn't attend committee meetings is because three of us can't be together in a setting where the things that are being discussed are likely to lead to decisions by the board. So it wasn't that only interested board members went, it's that you could only have a couple of us there at a time. So I wanted to make clear that you just didn't think that I just didn't go because I didn't care. I care a whole lot. So, next. Thank you, Jeff.
Welcome.
Thank you, Nancy. And if I gave any indication that people weren't there because they didn't care, I just would like to make that for the record. That was not my intent. Richard?
Probably nothing but comments, really. I mean, first of all, my thanks to, the citizens that were participants in the committee. That it's tremendous amount of information to go through. I had an opportunity to visit a meeting, and the enthusiasm, as well as sometimes the shock of the complexity, was truly appreciated. It's interesting. I've been passionate about this subject since joining the school board, became much more passionate about it when I was able to participate in the activities in Minerva Park. We saw opportunities there. We knew that we needed to get the ball rolling. Obviously, we've started that. Community involvement is going to be critical. I think some of the things that I'm concerned about, first, I am thankful for the enrollment trends update. I have been saying for a couple of years, I had very big concerns about us basing trend data on forecast lines that were strictly around the number of students that have historically been in the district. I think it's important to, and I was just pulling up some numbers. We tend to think of Olentangy School District as, this monster, right? They're bringing, multiple new high schools online. I think it's interesting to note, I actually just pulled it up. The Olentangy School District population within the school district boundaries is 164,000 people. The Westerville City School District population within the school boundaries is 160,000 people. The number of homes transacted in sales and put in contract for every month for the last couple of years has been about the same between us and Olentangy. Yet Olentangy is bringing a fifth high school online, right? And it's a simple reality from a numbers standpoint that there are more students under households or under rooftops in Olentangy, because we know the percentage of students that occupy houses today in Westerville. But we're transacting real estate at the same rate, which means people are moving into our community. And if you're anywhere in the uptown area, you'll know that a house went for sale on State Street and was in contract in 42 minutes. So, and we're seeing student-age children being brought into homes where baby boomers are now leaving in this market. So we have to think about the realities, and when we think about the second wave of schools that come behind, I think the aging is interesting. I appreciated the historical references. I think it's interesting. Westerville South was built when my dad was in junior high school, right? Now, if we think about the pace of change around capital improvements within a school district, especially of this size, a top 10 in the state, trying to move the needle quickly is relative, because Westerville North came online when I was in third grade, right? And the challenge that we see, and I'm very excited about getting the community involved, but the challenge that we will see is that our passion, interest, and emotion is tied directly to schools when our children are in them and when we are parents of children or grandparents of children that are in those schools. I literally live within walking distance of the school that I went to in a cottage up where I grew up. I've been back to that school twice in the last 30 years. And the last time I went 2 years to go to deliver a commencement address to a class 30 years after I left, I got lost. And it's a building that holds K through 12, and it looks entirely different, right? I was not involved in any of that. I'm excited about it, but I wasn't involved in any of the changes that happened in that building after I left. So we have to make sure that our processes are aligned for the long term, because changing these schools is a generational thing, right? If we get to work on Westerville South and it takes us 4 years, that means that an entire cohort of high school students goes through a school that's being renovated. and not done, right? They don't get the experience of a fully completed building, right? Only the kids that come after them do. You know, so this is for the long haul. Now, if we think about just a little bit further about that second tract, and I want us to not take our eye off the ball as it relates to all the great work that the committee's done, all the good work we're going to do in terms of evaluating the presentations and the decisions that we make as a board. They're going to resound and resonate, you know, for years and decades after we're no longer on this board, maybe not even around, right, on this earth. The second wave is if we finish these projects in 5 years and we get to the second wave before the 12-year mark, when I said that we do these things in generations, if you think of a generation as 25 years, that's super fast, right? If we get to that next wave within a 12-year time period, that is super fast. I am glad that we as a district were even able to talk about it, because many districts cannot have this discussion. But the challenge is that it will seem terribly slow to many people in our community, to our students that are sitting here this evening, because some of these projects will finish after you graduate, right? But in terms of moving this ship, it will be light speed if we get these projects done in the next, 5 to 15 years.
Ready? All right. So Liz and Jack, I'm going to ask you to come back up because I'm going to ask you guys some questions. And I wanted to thank Richard. I missed a meeting and he stepped in for me, so thank you. So I'm going to just follow by your slide of what you guys had up there, but what I want you to do is kind of paint a picture of how the committee came to putting these 3 items at the critical or the number 1 priority. So I know you both went on tours. So let's talk a little bit about South and the facility and what you saw, and so what made you put it up there?
Yes, so especially with my position with Westerville Parent Council, and there were several parents also on this committee besides myself. But on the tour, I mean, you definitely can see the aging infrastructure. And not that we haven't addressed something critical that's leaking or happening now, but it's just like in homeownership. Yes, you address the leaking faucet, but all the faucets are corroding. And so you really get that picture when you walk through South. I have heard from other parents as part of my council when they're in there working the booster groups, the bathrooms are embarrassing for other, sports teams to come in and other communities to come in. And, it isn't a 21st century learning space. You walk into Point View. I've gone into Westerville North and their shop, and it's a night and day difference. And, the white walls, the environment, the coldness. I couldn't believe on one side of the hallway how cold it was in a classroom, and yet directly across how warm it was. And that's the age of our infrastructure. And so South High School was something with the number of students we have and the need anyway to increase the capacity at the high school level with projection numbers we saw it as critical. And then I'll go ahead and let Jack, if you have any words on South.
Well, first I concur with Liz's assessment from the tour, but just speaking for myself, I've had the opportunity to volunteer at both North and South, and there are, when you go in at class change and you see the hubbub and the rushing around, and you navigate the parking lots and the access to the various spaces in the building. Before I went on the tour, I had the impression that it was not optimal, I guess is the best way to say it. So it just the tour reinforced from an infrastructure standpoint, but the configuration of the building left me less than impressed, personally speaking. that's south.
Okay. So what about the middle school, the idea for adding a middle school? Because I know being there, the committee first thought about adding an elementary school and then kind of switched. So tell us a little bit about that.
I've been at all the middle schools and have been fortunate to go at lunchtime. And this is an issue with South as well, anytime between classes. I mean, your hallways are so crowded. At a middle school level, I actually had parents communicate to me that they go in to volunteer, whether that's in a classroom or with extracurriculars, and there just isn't the space. They're helping a student in a hallway with crowded spaces anyway. And looking at the numbers that were presented to us, it's over capacity. It makes sense of why 3 of the middle schools feel very crowded. And we saw that as a priority. If we don't address that until down the line, I mean, that's a safety concern and issue that we had as a group and wanted to address. And also serving the south end of the district as well. You know, I know transportation is an issue with having a middle schooler. I have a middle schooler myself. You still have to transport middle schoolers. Well, if someone isn't at home, those kids can't walk home. I live south of 270 myself. My child can't walk home after an after-school event. And so, you know, these were all concerns that we had as a group. I mean, it was unanimous. I mean, there was much discussion around these things, but yet our decisions were very clear. It was actually a pretty easy process to come up with things that were very important, especially once touring the buildings.
Again, I concur with Liz's assessment. I also would add, in the case of the new middle school, there was some discussion fairly early about transitioning Hawthorne into a middle school. And, you know, when all the requests for data were met and so forth, it just seemed that wasn't, you know, as workable as starting on a fresh plot of land, which fortunately the district does not appear to have a land, at least it has potential sites in the right spot, which is rare, I think, in many areas. The other area, I've had the opportunity to spend a lot of time at Walnut Springs, and again, at either lunch or a class break, the first thing I notice is the sound level. You know, with that many kids in that small a space, it can get intense. And sometimes noise is a good thing, but it's continual.
So then that takes us to the third point, which the safety concerns. And you had said briefly about parking lots, but can you expand a little bit when you're talking about safety concerns around the district?
Well, the district has done a fabulous job, and we know that there are things in the budget. However, some of the members of the committee brought up, I guess there's some of the parking lots are dark at South or need for more lighting there. You know, air quality is a concern, especially in a building like South with the issues with the HVAC and some of the windows and such. So those were issues that we just wanted to put in there because we want you to know that we still hope these are a priority
Sure.
of the district, and especially in the world we live in as well, to continue to address the safety needs in the community in which we live. I mean, the addition of the buzzer systems in all the schools was awesome how fast that went. I'm sure every parent probably feels a little better, the fact that our buildings have those. And so those are examples of things you have done, but we want those issues still addressed in the future and make sure that there is monies available for those needs.
I would just reiterate that recommendation was not meant to highlight defects in the safety. It's an encouragement to continue the path that we're on and not short funding for that to do something else.
Okay. Thank you. And that's, I really just wanted the room and my fellow board members to hear some of that stuff, because I think when you just hear the bullet points, you're missing a pretty large, important piece of that. So thank you very much, and thank you to all the committee members. I'm going to keep talking, though. I mean, you guys can sit down, but, so a couple things I'm just going to tell you my thoughts and feelings. And I jotted down notes, so they're a little bit out of order. I have zero interest in cutting any programs that are in this district, meaning the able and talented and the magnet program. So I've heard a little bit of buzz going around the district. That is not all what we are talking about. We are simply talking about facilities. I loved the slide on there when it talked about maybe expanding opportunities. It would be nice to get back to where we were many years ago. So just my thoughts and feelings. We talked a little bit about finances. Dave, I forget his last name, Dr. Yes, came and presented to the committee, and I thought it was very beneficial. I think it would be nice if he came to one of our board meetings and presented, so the community could see a little bit about what was talked about. I thought that was really good. Critical issues, sorry. Still, I liked, we keep talking about the enrollment, and Richard, you made some awesome points about how quickly that is going to change. I guess I hadn't done the math in my head in 3 years. I mean, middle school over. So for me, I'm interested in moving forward in the community process. Absolutely. The focus on Emerson and Hamby and really talking about community members is critical. Dave Conley to come and talk about financial comments. My only little piece would be, I would like to see maybe Jeff be able to start some design processes for our critical items to bring back to the community just to continue this conversation. I think we're going to have to give them something to talk about. I feel like we need to do something about a middle school in the southern end, as well as fixing some of the inefficiencies in South. Thank you.
I really, it's just very interesting to me how honored I feel, and I bet the rest of the board, that we get to have this kind of conversation, and we have the healthiness of our district that we are able to have this kind of conversation and talk about numbers of students and dollars and facilities that are loved and revered, and facilities that need deep help, and facilities that we just are excited to help create the best learning environment that we can. We always start with safe, warm, dry. But then we would like to go to inspirational, innovative, creative, inspiring to repeat. And so I will not dive deep into all of my notes. The board here done a great job. I have, along the specific, and I'm going to challenge my board members here to chime in on one of the last slides Dr. Kellogg had, specific board commitments. Are there any of those, and I don't know if we can go back one or two. Thank you, Jeff. Are there any of my fellow board members that would say they would not like to move forward with the community involvement engagement process?
Can I say something?
Sure.
I would like to move forward with the community engagement process, but I was going to recommend that maybe we start with the priority 1 items and then move forward with the committee's important items or priority 2 items after that, just so we can get the process really going on the priority one items. So,
And I know that's not an official kind of resolution, but discussion on that.
It isn't that I have any concerns about the priority one items. I'm just concerned about making decisions, when I make decisions about having the package, so that I can say, all right, when I'm going to do this, I'm doing this because this is going to happen here, so that I have a better sense of how things play out as a whole. But I think probably what might, I don't know if it would help or not, as the surveys designed, as the focus groups, community meeting sorts of things are designed to consider how they're weighted and how the discussion goes and how questions are placed. That can help move things along fairly quickly.
Okay, any other discussion on this, Jerry's idea?
I'm not opposed to it. I agree with Dr. Nestor Baker. As long as it doesn't slow us down to getting to a complete package for review, if we can manage those logistics, I'd be fine with looking at it in two parts. I just don't want it to slow down the overall timeline. I want us to stay aggressive.
Stay aggressive, right, yeah, thank you. Yes, Trace?
So that's, I think, what I was trying to say, too. I think that we need to start a little bit of the design to give the community something to look at, because I think we know those are critical items that need to be addressed, so I think they can happen hand in hand. So,
yeah, I definitely agree that I think we should start the design process too. I do think that those are two things that can move forward simultaneously. Start design and also get more community feedback, because we have gotten quite a bit of community feedback this past year with the strategic plan. That did include facilities as part of that. So I think if we begin with the design process, we'll even be able to get better community feedback.
My concern about that is if we start design, that basically says, we've decided what we're going to do. And I worry about that. I worry about that a lot, especially when we're talking about, $14 million for Safe, Warm, and Dry at South, to $34 million for Safe, Warm, and Dry, plus another $20 million for whatever that may be. And if we start in design on that $20 million, and I don't see how we could do the $14 million without also considering what might go there, it basically says, okay, we're targeting your feedback on what we've decided we are going to design. And that worries me. I am very leery of going out and saying, we haven't made up our minds, but we're designing this.
well,
I
I was
guess-
saying options, design options, not a specific design.
Just the beginning phases of design. And I guess my thoughts are, I mean, we've already begun community feedback this past year with strategic planning. There was a facilities portion to that. I think the committee spent a lot of time on this based on my interaction with some of the members and discussing with other community members and my own experience, and looking at the data regarding the middle schools and how enrollment has really gotten beyond capacity. I think that it's important to, I think they've gotten it right. I think the priority one items for me are the new middle school and renovations at South, so.
I'm just really worried about going for design of renovations, because, yeah, we did get feedback in the strategic planning process, but when I think about the numbers of people who gave us feedback on that, and the number of comments about facilities versus the number of comments about program and so forth, I don't feel confident that I have received a lot of feedback other than conversations I've had with people and the relatively small number of people who've been engaged thus far. So I'm just leery about saying we haven't made decisions and then making those decisions without allowing the community to say, we are in favor of pursuing significant renovation. We think it's a great idea to build a middle school. And I hope they do say that, but I don't know if they will. So we shall see. But I'm leery about it. I'm very leery, because when you go out and people believe that you've already made the decisions, then it skews whatever information people are going to give you.
If I might, in the question of something to look at, I'm looking at a couple of things, depending on where you do it. So to the point of what could be something to look at, with South, I think there are multiple versions, to your point. Anything from the $14 million solution to something else. And I'm not suggesting where that is yet, I'm just suggesting that there are things that can be prepared for people to look at. The new middle school is an easier one. It's going to be conceptual drawing, but it would show you it's going to go here and it's going to have 700 students and it's not going to be like a showroom car. It's just going to be, there's a block mass here, this many students, this is where it would go. It won't answer the question, who goes there?
Right.
There's no boundary to it. On the next set of pieces, the Longfellow renovation expansion, again, conceptual block mass, there'd be a block here on top of this. This is what would be left. These are the renovation parts. Same with Whittier. You're not going to see, color palettes. You're not going to see classrooms. You're going to see, we could stick a wing on here. And even then, this community's responding to what they're seeing. It's not going to be a level of detail. We couldn't have the level of detail down to that kind of showroom look to start a community engagement process in January. But we could have hey, we drop a block of classrooms here, 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 and that's what we're talking about. The new elementary, again, is pretty easy. The Hawthorne renovation is really nothing to see other than it's going to be these. I think what we can get out of that for a Hawthorne or a Whittier and even a South is what are the components that are going to be addressed, right, Jeff? So we would be able to break down. You had that large slide of, we looked at these components, roof, HVAC, et cetera, electrical. If we said the Hawthorne renovation project that would hit, has costs, estimated costs associated with HVAC for this month, roofing for this month, we can do that, right? But we're not, you know what I'm saying? Maybe not, I'm not being clear.
We will have that breakdown. I'm looking at preliminary version of that now, a breakdown of those building components, just identifying the condition assessment piece, the 14 million piece, if that's what you're.
Right,
So we will have that.
All right, so it's kind of like this. You take your car in for a checkup, the guy goes through it, and he hands you a list of things that can be done to each component, how much it would cost to have that done. Some of that we can do for some of these buildings, but showroom ready, like this is where the classrooms would be, and they're going to look like this. We're not anywhere near close. The hardest one in this is the South one, because it's anywhere from, as Jeff said, he has kind of a kit of parts that he's put together with a maximum end and a minimum end, and what's in between. And so what's in between is how much of that in between do you want to share for community consumption? To say, are you asking them to say, I like this version of the South project, or I like this version of the South project? Or are you just saying, these are various ways we could address the South project. We want you to know about them. What are your feelings? Those are two different questions. And are you asking to give the impression for the community to weigh in of those versions of this project, we prefer this one? Or are you simply trying to create conversation and understanding that we are looking at various versions and what's the feedback to those various versions? I think they're two different kinds of questions, I think.
I think to bring that up a level, I think Dr. Nesterbaker is where I'm at, which is the community has to say that they're good with us progressing, period, right, relative to the critical priorities. I have a lot of faith on this one that the community is going to be very positive and very eager to pursue. So, the second part of that is that what I don't want is the efforts to gain the consensus support of the community to slow us down on moving on the criticals. And maybe that's a little bit preemptive to say, I feel pretty strongly the community is going to be behind us doing these things on the critical list. The importance may be a little bit more negotiable, but, you know, based upon the timelines that, Jeff, you've talked about, I mean, frankly, every month lost is an impact to getting the project done, you know, sooner, right? And it's just that simple. And in the two particular cases of what's critical, they're called critical because it's critical, right? So I'm still back to the same place that I was. I'm good with us talking about conceptual components relative to the criticals as a way to kind of throw some gasoline on the fire and get things moving. But I'm also sensitive to the fact that we need the support of the whole community relative to all the priorities that we've got on the table.
Right.
I think, Dr. Kellogg and Jeff, I would lean more toward, and really, you can say, who cares the way I lean, I'm just one vote. I think we need to take to the community some concepts of, and I'm just looking at critical right now. I think back to Jerry's idea, that I want to be sensitive, Dr. Nestor Baker, to perception, but I also don't want to be just held back by it. That I think if we are really asking the community, tell us what you think about South renovation, anything from safe, warm, and dry to innovative, inspirational, et cetera. They have to know some kind of components. What does that mean? Not where are all the rooms going to go, et cetera, but if you want this innovative, creative school, we could provide this kind of space, and the costs associated with that would be like this. Whereas the school community may push back and say, we think all of that is good, but we think that's too much, or vice versa. I'm more toward, I think there needs to be some, and I think, Dr. Kellogg, you're right, the middle school piece is much easier because it's a new build, potentially on land, and that's just an easier, and I think we all agree the safety stuff, which I think we all concur the school has done really well with, and Liz, I think you even brought that out with the buzzer, right? Mm-hmm. So I know we're trying to figure this out. But if I was a community member, well, I am. If I was a community member that's not on the board and hadn't seen all of this, and you brought to me 3 or 4 concepts, I think, just me, I don't think I would say to you, you've decided this already. I think I would, let me, just the
I'm sorry, I
last,
thought you were
just,
done.
no, just the last little blurb. I think I would feel more informed of, okay, so 15 million does this, 25, 22 does this kind of thing, and 20, I think I would feel more informed.
I actually think that's a doable thing. To me, that's not the same as designing pieces and parts and so forth. I think, the concepts, I can't respond to somebody who says, are you in favor of spending $34 million if I don't have a sense of what $34 million buys? So I think the way, John, that you were talking about it, makes sense to me. Because you can't just go out and say, hey, what do you want to do to South? And expect to get decent feedback. But to say, here are the recommendations, and here is what, $14 million does, and here's what roughly $34 million does, and so that people can have a sense of what they are responding to. That gives us a sense, and, in the timeline that we talk about for the community involvement process, because it is very compressed in that phase 1 of community involvement, to get that kind of information, that then sets us up really well to move into developing more, without having made the decision without the input of the community, beyond the concepts.
Let me say this real quickly. I really, seriously, hold on to that. So bullet one, move forward with the community involvement process. I think we are also saying, correct me if I'm wrong, that in the level one, we are looking for some conceptual images, something for people to see ideas of what could be done at the different levels. Now, the committee came with 4 different levels, as I recall, right?
3.
That's right, number 4 was, yeah. Okay, we're not talking about that right now. Okay, yes. Correct? Does that get back to your concern?
Yes, that's actually what I was hoping for, was design concepts.
Okay.
Because I thought we'd be able to get better feedback that way, so, thank you.
Are you mostly there? Okay,
It's always the devil's in the details.
it
and we have to be
absolutely is.
careful what the devil looks like.
It absolutely, Jeff, she's calling you a devil, just want you to know that.
He's used to that.
He's been called worse. Okay, so we are clear on bullet 1.
Oh, well, to everybody, me. So my question, I heard, lead with phase 1. I think we can develop what you're talking about for, I'm going to pull out Emerson and Hamby as a separate conversation for a moment. I think we can develop what you're talking about for everything that was recommended. So are we saying just put South and the new middle school out there in phase 1 in response to that and not do anything with the rest of it for now? I see one head yes, I see,
You're nodding yes on community engagement or design stuff?
Just design stuff for the critical components, and then, yes.
so do you want any community engagement regarding the tier 2 or tier 3 components at all, or do you just want it to be South? And, okay, so you want one communication plan, but the specific, the more, what can we see for South and the new middle school? The other components, we don't need what it would look like kind of concept, just the yeah, okay.
Yeah, but they're still in there, and I wanted to make sure
They're
you
still-
heard
they're
that.
still-
Yes.
Yes.
The thing I think we want to be cautionary of with South, and I have to have some people help me understand how to do it, I think, because I don't think what I think I hear you saying is you don't want this to appear to be a referendum on which South project you want done. You want to gather community input on the various components, and there's a real gray area in about what people are doing, so the design of the community engagement has to be careful to, unless you're looking for, no, we're kind of looking for where would the community put most support. But I don't hear you saying, which one of these would you most likely support? I hear you saying, gather feedback on each of the concepts.
Yeah, I think that the community needs to see, I think Nancy said this, the community needs to see the magnitude of what $34 million looks like, right? Because concepts in the community may think that $34 million is, building the Polaris Mall, right? I mean, or $34 million just isn't enough, right? So I think that they need to be able to see what that order of magnitude is, but not, like you said, not the detail, not down to the color palette.
Now I understand better, thank you.
Good. No, because I want you and Jeff and the committee to leave here really feeling good about, okay, this is what they're asking us to do, next steps. Great. Bullet 2, engage building staff at schools slated for potential renovations. Anybody not want to do that? Yeah, who's going to vote against that?
Well, I do want to do it, but I got something to say about it.
Okay, go ahead.
The kind of wiggle for me on it is engage building staff at schools slated for potential renovation. And the next one is targeted community engagement focused on Hanby and Emerson. So we say we want building staff at schools slated for potential renovations. Okay, but that says that we have definitely decided that we're not interested in renovating Hanby and Emerson. There we go. If we do not include Hanby and Emerson in discussions, our decision and the community engagement approach is defined on getting rid of those buildings.
What I just said to Nancy off microphone was, that's exactly what I wrote down. My suggestion, how did you phrase it? My hope, my suggestion was, I have not made any decisions here, and anybody that says I has is a liar, liar, pants on fire. But if we are going to engage those buildings slated, if we're going to engage the staff for those buildings slated for renovation by saying to them, what is needed in your facility, what is holding you back, then I think we need to do the same thing to the staff, not the staffs, the staff at Hanby and Emerson, and gather them together and say, what don't you have you wish you had? What is holding you back from, et cetera? And I know we've done some discussion, but I would really like to merge bullet 2 and 3, engage building staff. And I wrote it down a couple of times, and listen, that's not an oversight on anybody. I just thought to myself, well, let's just go to them and say, you tell us what is limiting, and a part of the phrase was, how does the building enhance or limit your teaching and learning? I think I snatched that phrase off of one of the slides. So I wrote that down a couple of times, and I thought, I'd like to see that.
I would too, and I think when we have those discussions, it's about what's holding you back, but it's also about what do you love? What do you want to hold on to, and what's holding you back? Because all of this is weighed in the balance.
Good, yeah.
You know, and even as we talk about Central College, poor Central College has been kind of left out of all of this discussion. We need to talk to the people who are currently using Central College. So, do you understand what the point is? By drawing it in on only those slated for potential renovation, we have made de facto decisions.
Agreed. And so I'll be the devil's advocate and tell you that I think the cost, aside from the educational efficiencies, the cost to the district long-term for maintaining those facilities is a price tag that needs to be given strong consideration. Our ability to do some cool things to maybe make it feel a little bit better and make the staff feel a little bit better about where it is and the kids and the parents doesn't take care of the long-term problem of very, very old buildings that are difficult to find parts for, to retrofit for. There are major long-term capital improvements that this board will spend money if you keep those buildings online. I'm just being the devil's advocate. I'm not telling you what way to go. I'm your realtor giving you the information. The long-term investments to keep those buildings online in this district are from a from a data perspective, I'm going to back up. I won't say rational.
Yeah, I think you better back up.
This one may get me flayed. That's okay. There's a huge expenditure of capital on those two buildings to maintain them further on. You can make that decision, but I think you have to recognize that the other side of the coin is if you don't take the recommendations of the committee, you're committing to a long-term capital investment in those buildings that at some point it brings the question, why do we continue to spend money on them?
I think, though, we're looking at it as gathering data, and we just want to hear what the staff has to say. So it will help us make a better decision, because even though they're expensive, it's not just our decision, it's the community's decision. So I think we need to talk to them.
Well, and we can't, I would be against bullet 3, targeting the community engagement focused on Hanby and Emerson until we have the staff's input, so we could go to the community and say, the staff is telling us this about these facilities.
Well, then we have a timeline disconnect here, because,
Correct.
yeah.
And I'm good with that.
Well, I don't have a problem with us inverting the timeline. I mean, it's, you know, I do think bullet point 3 is is innocently presumptuous, right? I don't know that I would describe it as saying we've made a decision. I think it's presumptuous. And it should be incorporated, frankly, not in 2, because it says community engagement. It should be incorporated in number 1, right? Now, if we feel that we need to have staff input prior to community involvement, then we need to invert that timeline. Like I said, I don't have a problem with that. You know, the only thing that I'm going to state is what I had an opportunity to say when I did attend a community or a committee meeting, which is we need to make sure that it is crystal clear that what we are not talking about is renovation. That is an overused word. It is easy for us to renovate plumbing. It is easy for us to renovate roofing. It is easy for us, you just simply take what's there, replace it with what's new. The question that has to be put before staff and community is the physical facility able to be reconfigured. If it is not reconfigurable, I'll go with what Dr. Kellogg is saying. No amount of money will get that school building where it needs to be, because you can't reconfigure it to be usable for the purposes that we need it for. Hamby's a great example. The way that the pillars are in that building to create larger classrooms, it is physically impossible, right? Without us tearing down the building and basically rebuilding new. So it has reconfiguration limitations, and we need to make sure that that's clearly understood. Because if people go, well, I just want you to renovate it, then we're just simply slapping a new coat of paint on a capital expenditure problem that's going to persist, right? If they say, I'd like the building to remain the facade that it is, but everything else torn down like Hollywood, and everything put, 21st century behind that facade, that's a different conversation, right? And we really need to make sure that there's some clarity in the guideposts around how we ask for input on these things. I mean, I'll go back to what you said, Nancy. We can't just say, what would you like done at South? Because that's just that's an entire Pandora's box of opportunities, right? Good and bad.
I should probably, maybe the way I framed this didn't communicate what I was suggesting. The community engagement focus on Hamby and Emerson, there is the opportunity, so we can take the opportunity to fold in talking to the staff at Hamby and Emerson and ask the same question. Bullet number 3 was over the sensitive issue about community expectations, that if the board makes a decision to no longer use those buildings as they are today, what are the acceptable parameters the community would be okay with if those buildings came offline? So that wasn't intended to say, that was intended to say, do we want to find out what acceptable use is if we take them offline? The conversation with staff about the inadequacies is one part. And I'll say this, and I hope it does, probably said some things that have come off the wrong way, and I'm probably being twittered to death. That's okay. The input from staff about the teaching and learning expertise, I value that feedback. They don't have the extra expertise to talk about the plumbing, the roofing, the pieces that we know, and whether or not continuing to pump millions of dollars into those things to keep them going makes sense. So I think Richard's described it very well in terms of difference between reconfiguration. So we can have the conversation with the staff. We know what the dollars and cents are for capital improvement. The intent of that question was, are you at all interested in having conversation about what might be potential uses that the community would favor if they're not used by the school district as a school? If not, we take it off and we just don't have the answer. Because if you come back with, we're taking them offline, the timing of taking them offline and what do you want to, that is the defining question. If a Board of Education in Westfield decides to take a building offline, particularly those and where they are and their significance, what is acceptable to the community?
I think we have to talk about it.
A lot.
Well, that was the intent of the question. Do you want to start those conversations, or are we not ready to have those conversations? The piece of asking, folding up the piece of Hamby and Emerson staff talking about the educational environment, what's limiting there, what they'd like to see, we have. The limitations of the building and reconfiguration versus renovation, we have. It's the sticky question of, if you're faced with taking them offline, what's the acceptable parameters? That's the intent of that question.
When you say talk about it, Tracy, do you mean us, or as bullet 3 says, community engagement about it?
Oh, I think it's got to be the community engagement. I mean, I want to know what the community thinks.
But have we confirmed that we're going to change the timeline? I guess that's, to get this, kind of focused back on our commitments. Are we going to, which I'm perfectly fine with. I think it's very respectful for us to approach the staff associated with the buildings in the critical and the importance, and get their feedback and use that as additive information for community meetings. I don't have a problem with that approach. I just want to make sure that, we figure out which one we're going to do.
But I think we've already decided bullet 1, right? Moving forward with the community involvement process. Is that
but
right?
We also talked about getting staff input, and then that
Not
being.
for level 1. We didn't talk about
Yeah, we
that.
did. We brought that to the
No, I don't think so.
dance.
Go ahead.
Well, I think, Richard, the point that you raised that made my eyebrows go up, you said that the community engagement focus on Hanby and Emerson doesn't fold into 2, it folds into 1.
Right.
And I think that has merit. So basically, we're looking at kind of a mixture in some ways. So community involvement process would also include focus, a specific focus on Hanby and Emerson. Number 2, engaging building staff at schools, those are different questions in some ways. So there's no reason not to include the staffs as well in those questions. So it's basically taking bullet number 3 and dividing it in 2 different ways.
I think I understand. You want to put the Hanby Emerson question about community perceptions on other uses into 1, and you want to go back to the staff at Emerson and Hanby and ask them about the same question we're asking at the other renovations.
Both.
You got to be careful about how you're asking the community about other uses for those buildings.
Mhm.
Because that in and of itself is a decision.
Good?
I think Evan understands.
Clear, I should say.
Well, we won't go further without test driving it with you all, that's for sure. So we'll.
Which may
you know,
lead us to change the timeline.
Exactly. So, we have the organizational meeting, so we'll try and get a package together and have opportunity to sit down and make sure that you all are, it's more important that you all are okay with it. It doesn't matter if I'm okay with it. This is about you all being okay with what we're suggesting. It's not about me.
Yeah, I want to make sure you leave this room, though, and Jeff leaves this room, Liz and Jack, understanding this is what we're asking of you.
Yeah, I think we're capturing the general idea. We can, and Greg Vibrance will be involved, and the rest of the team. We'll start to build that,
Fine.
but we're not going to push this out for feedback until you all get a chance to vet it and make sure we're asking it the right way, the way you want it. But I think I understand the changes you just made there.
And clarifying financial commitments. What comments do you have on that one?
I was hoping that maybe, was his name Dave? Okay, Dave Conley.
Conley.
If we could have Dave Conley come to a board meeting in January and make a presentation on some of the options, I think that would be really helpful.
Yep, I agree.
Good.
Yep. That's what I thought you'd want. Okay.
And board review, I'm assuming you will be, that's talking about bringing the information to us at the end of this first phase.
We were working on the second half of the year board presentation calendar and leadership this morning, and looking at when we felt that which board meeting we were slating for bringing forward to you the feedback from the first phase. And so I think we had that in the first meeting in March. I'll look at that and review that with the board to say this is where we're targeting. We want to give enough time, but we don't want to linger, so it's going to be a compressed timeline, but we'll get there.
Is there any way we can see some of the comments coming back? Meaning, so as far as community involvement and staff, is there, will someone be logging that? Is that something we can read?
Yes, there'd be no sense in having the conversation, so we'll catalog and document the results. The online component actually has, it's not a poll. The system we're using is as an opportunity for any community member who chooses to engage to read what other people are writing and weigh in on what other people are writing and provide some feedback and weighting on those things. I actually like that tool because it means the communities through the internet having conversations with each other about it that we catalog and collect, as opposed to a poll, which is us to them and back to us, or even small group meetings where you have 6, 7, 10 people. Limited hearings, who else is hearing, so we'll catalog that information and bring it forward. So this will be our winter break project, as we're.
Yes.
One thing I was hoping to add is for the community involvement piece, I'm glad that we're talking to staff about the buildings, the different priorities. I think that's really important, and the community, but I'd also like to suggest that maybe we want to survey students as well and get their input. So they're the ones that are in the classes trying to learn, so I think that would be really important.
That component can be done as well, yeah. In fact, I think they'll probably use the online tool more than maybe some of the adults, so I think we can do that.
Thank you to the committee, just a tremendous amount of work and time. Thank you for being here tonight and listening to this opening discussion. Jeff, thank you very much for the work, Mr. LaRose, that you have done as well, and now have been asked to continue to do next phase. Dr. Kellogg, thank you for diving deeply into this, and this matters to the community, and all of us, no matter our nuances up here, all of us know that this matters to the community, and what I would say to the community is that it matters a lot to us, too. And we will look at this hard and deep with the best brains that we can come up with and make the best decisions we know how. That's why we're here. Moving on. Now, at our next meeting, we're going to go into the second phase of the fleet, right? Are we going to talk about that next meeting? Okay, moving on.